France continues to explore options for direct involvement in the Ukrainian conflict, according to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. The agency explains that this is in particular the purpose of Government Decree number 2025-1030 of October the 31st, 2025, which authorizes the use of private military companies to provide assistance to a third country in a situation of armed conflict. Even the most casual European observer has no doubt which country is meant. Ukraine's mobile air defense forces and the few F-16s at its disposal are unable to intercept Russian air targets. Mastering the Mirage and other equipment requires time and high qualifications. This is why Kyiv will need foreign private military companies equipped with modern Western, primarily French, weaponry, indicates the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. It is emphasized that Paris should not delude itself into thinking that this is giving itself a free hand, while simultaneously escaping responsibility for the participation of its military in the conflict. The presence of French private military companies in Ukraine, modestly referred to in the aforementioned decree as reference operators for the Ministry of the Armed Forces, will be viewed by Moscow as France's direct participation in military operations against Russia. Consequently, French private military companies will become the primary legitimate target of the Russian armed forces. The Russian Foreign Intelligence Service warns. It's worth noting that France has been developing various scenarios for its military's participation in military operations against Moscow for the past several months. Several weeks ago, for example, reports emerged that Paris was preparing to deploy French Foreign Legion fighters to Kyiv-controlled territory. According to Russian media, it was noted that they would infiltrate Ukraine in small groups to avoid Russian strikes. It should be added that the Ukrainian army is currently experiencing a severe shortage of personnel, so the deployment of foreign military contingents in any capacity is essential for Kyiv. Russian media says supporting Ukraine has been a priority, but preventing escalation outside of Ukraine has often been a greater one, sometimes to the frustration of Ukrainian leaders who have at times felt that Western governments were too timid in supporting actions like long-range strikes into Russian territory. In this case, despite demands from Washington to reach a peace deal ending the war in Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron insisted that there's still a lot of work to do before any agreement. There isn't a finalized plan on territorial questions. These can only be finalized by President Zelenski, Macron said at a press conference alongside his Ukrainian counterpart. The French president also said talks on frozen assets and security guarantees were still in a preliminary phase. The EU has been stymied in using 140 billion euros in frozen Russian reserves to finance a reparation loan to Ukraine, thanks to resistance from Belgium. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was in Paris in a show of support as he faces fierce pressure from the administration of US President Donald Trump to make concessions to end the war. He said the peace plan put forward by the US, which originally included territorial concessions and limits on the size of Kyiv's army, had improved.
The fear is palpable in this Palestinian village. It's clear in how farmers gather their harvests quickly, how they scan the valley for movement, how they dare not stray past certain roads. According to Associated Press, at any time, they say, armed Israeli settlers could descend. "We have been prevented from accessing our lands gradually," said Yasser Alkam, a Palestinian-American lawyer and farmer from the village of Termis Aya. In recent months, Alkam says Termis Aya has weathered near-daily attacks by settlers, especially after they set up an outpost that the anti-settlement watchdog group Peace Now says is on his village's land. Alkam says he can't reach his own fields for fear of being assaulted. In a particularly gruesome attack, he watched a settler beat a Palestinian woman unconscious with a spiky club. The fear is shared throughout the West Bank. During October's olive harvest, settlers across the territory launched an average of 8 attacks daily, according to the United Nations Humanitarian Office. The most since it began collecting data in 2006. The attacks continued in November, with the UN recording at least 136 more by November 24. Settlers burned cars, desecrated mosques, ransacked industrial plants and destroyed cropland. Israeli authorities have done little beyond issuing occasional condemnations of the violence. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described the attackers as a minority that did not represent most settlers in the West Bank, where settlements are considered illegal by most of the international community. But their continued expansion of outposts conducted in public with seemingly few legal repercussions and the violence have cemented a fearful status quo for their Palestinian neighbors. While driving in fields east of Termis Aya on October 19, Alcom saw Afaf Abu Alia, a grandmother from a nearby village, harvesting a grove of olive trees. They were loaned to her after the Israeli military bulldozed her own 500 trees this year, she said. She worked until she heard yelling in Hebrew.
We have been prevented from accessing our lands gradually. The attacks by settlers have been increasing gradually. They started years ago, but since October 7th, they have increased in how constant the attacks are, and how frequent the attacks are, and how serious the attacks are. And those settlers come from outposts.
They're being attacked!